Hello friends, I'm Jade and welcome back to Training the Commander Episode 3. In the previous video we discussed the role of the commander and what that means. If you haven't seen that video I would encourage you to check it out. In this segment we will be talking about the 4 different learning styles and how you can adapt them to your trainings. I would say that this topic will be the most challenging to put into practice because this requires a lot of self-analysis to determine what you are currently doing in your training and how those practices may be positively or negatively affecting certain individuals. It's important to remember that one of the main roles of the commander is to teach, and the teacher's greatest challenge is getting through to the student. Now you may think that I'm overthinking this and this whole concept can be reduced to simply explaining an encounter and calling it good, but it really isn't that simple. We all have a distinct learning language that we use to soak up new information, and this language is exactly what you as a teacher must learn to speak, or at least understand, in order to make sure that what you are trying to show the individual really sinks in. Pay close attention to this section because this is where we begin to discuss the how-to for training raids. Let's get started. I'm going to say right now, you can't make everyone happy. Someone will always have a problem with how you do things. You may hear things like, this commander talks too fast, they talk too slow, or this commander talks too much. I'm more of a hands-on kind of person. Likewise, you will hear the opposite. This commander gave so little instruction. I like to know what I'm getting into beforehand. These complaints represent both ends of the spectrum. Now, our job as commanders isn't to cater to one or the other, but rather to find a balance between both styles that will yield effective results. Now, Wipe has given me the opportunity to work with many different learning styles and find ways to connect with as many of them as I can. This approach takes a great deal of patience, but also a thorough understanding of your role as a commander. I will preface by saying that I claim to be no authority on this topic. However, I will share with you what I have discovered in my experience and what worked and what didn't. So we'll take a look at the 4 common learning styles: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and literary, and how I have found ways to connect with all of them in my trainings. We'll start with visual and kinesthetic learners. I tend to describe both visual and kinesthetic learners as very similar, since both will benefit most by diving right into the content and either seeing the mechanics in real time and or experiencing them at speed. I notice with these 2 learning types that lengthy explanations tend to lose this crowd or simply overwhelm them. So in the past, when I've identified strong visual learners in my group, I've tried to provide some video material prior to training an encounter that they can reference when I later explain the mechanics to the group. This can work well for helping trainees learn specialty roles where it isn't beneficial to see an example of what proper execution looks like. There are lots of great videos and resources online, so be sure to link those when applicable. I will most often do a few pulls where I demonstrate the role while having them carefully watch, either via my Discord stream or have them close by in the counter at the least. Discord is a very powerful tool that should be taken advantage of whenever possible to help drive your point home. I have recently received great feedback from trainees that found it helpful when I streamed my screen while using the standard paint program to draw diagrams outlining tanking pathing, role positioning, and mechanical movements. Throughout the encounter, I will constantly give callouts to direct people's attention to certain mechanics that I want them to take careful notice of. Most mechanics in the game will have a visual and an auditory telegraph that I make sure to describe prior and during the encounter so that I can condition the trainees to look out for these tells in the future. Guild Wars 2 is visually a very noisy game. A lot of times you'll have trainees that are visual learners that will experience a visual overload since they don't know exactly what to look for. That is why it is very important as the commander to relieve that confusion by directing them to see what you want and when. A method that I have implemented as a standard training technique in my trainings is the weaponless pull. I will talk much more about that in the tips and tricks video and all the talk where we talk about all the different methods and training techniques we use in our trainings. I have found that this method to yield very positive results because it forces trainees to do nothing but focus on the mechanics and the auto attacks of the boss. Alright, now let's talk about auditory and literary learners. These type of learners, I have found, will appreciate a more detailed explanation of the encounter before diving in headfirst. They will benefit from differentiating mechanics with their individual names and will pay closer attention to the sound cues that present during the encounter. When I know I have a few of these learners in my group, I'll be sure to utilize the ping feature in Guild Wars 2 to ping a various skill, traits, buffs, and debuffs that are applicable for the current encounter, so that they can take note of the names when hearing them in the explanation. I will say it is much more difficult to cater to the literary learners in the wipe training method since most of the training is conducted audibly. Major mechanics and directions that need to be made very clear can be written in squad chat as another reinforcement measure. So one of the mistakes I see a lot of training commanders make that ultimately loses this portion of learners is that they will complete their explanation and then they will give very little feedback and callouts during the actual pull. This is problematic because it assumes that every trainee fully comprehended the explanation and they are solely responsible for executing the strategy. This seems like it may be a viable strategy, but it alienates certain learners that need to be conditioned repeatedly to start noticing these mechanics on their own. In an encounter where certain mechanics have defined audio cues or written cues on your HUD or in the combat chat, I will make a point to bring their attention to those specific tells. So what do we do? At the end of the day, there is no method that works 100% of the time for everyone, so all we can do is try our best to bring a little of everything so that each trainee feels like they are being talked to and not talked at. Oftentimes we'll pick out an individual that doesn't seem to get it. Despite all your explanations or the multitude of pulls and re-pulls that you've done, you aren't completely convinced that this individual understands what's going on. Maybe they have a serious learning disability, maybe it's their equipment, or maybe they're just straight up bad. Now I'll pose the question that you might not want to hear. What if the problem is you? If you have to think about it, then maybe you need to abandon your previous approach and start looking at some new methods that you can implement into your own trainings to try and connect better with those learners that may be struggling to keep up with the rest of the group's pace because of a simple learning barrier. A simple one-on-one can move mountains in situations like this. Some people may be struggling with something specific but are too shy or scared to ask for help in front of the group. Fix that. You can. Whenever I run into this issue with one of my trainees, I will always refer back to the wipe method. First, I will identify the trainees that are struggling and then try to see what they are having trouble with. After the pull, I will ask them what they believe they are struggling with so that I can discern whether or not they are aware of the mechanic they are failing or they have zero clue as to what's going wrong. Next, I will analyze the approach I initially took and reinforce my explanation of the mechanics by providing a helpful answer and some additional tips to help them succeed in the next pull. If necessary, I will try to simplify the next pull for them by relieving the expectations and personal responsibilities and give them a singular objective to focus on. It's easy for people to get distracted during a pull, so I will make sure that the trainee is focusing on what I want them to do by reminding them when and what to look for during the pull. Afterwards, always take a moment to confirm with them to see if the new approach was helpful and if they feel more confident about the mechanic. If they answer yes, then that's great, move on. If they answer no, then go back to step 1 and try again. It is important to always remember that in wipe, no one gets left behind. We will bring the weakest link up to par with the rest of the group. As long as you have the will and the know-how to make it happen, you can turn anyone into a successful raider in Guild Wars 2. So thank you again for watching, and I hope as always that you find these videos of some help. Although it may seem that we are going a little overboard with this series, I want to express that my initial intent for these videos is to help enhance your raid experience and make a more fun raiding community for now and in the future. As always, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you can do that now to help support our efforts. In the next video, we'll start learning about the fundamentals of raiding, alright? Catch you soon.